Hi, welcome to Landscape of Mothers. I'm Jill Clifton. I wanted to keep talking about teens and what it is to raise teenagers and some of the reasons that it's really hard and some of the ways that and places that we can make it a little easier. So one of the developmental tasks of sort of adolescence, so somewhere between like 12 and 18, 19, is that during that period, there's a whole host of things that happen where teens are really responsible for learning how to be independent. And I think one of the places that parents struggle with teens is that the parents are still wanting to maintain control, which isn't a bad thing, depending on how far we want to go with it. And yet the teen is supposed to learn how to be independent. So it puts parents in a difficult place where we have to choose the places where we're willing to like open up and let it go and let teens make some decisions, even if we already know that it's going to go badly, right? And there's some places where out of our one of our jobs as parents is to protect our children. So we can't just like be like, whatever, man, and let them do anything. But we have to be able to wisely choose places where we can let our teens exhibit more and more control in their lives, where we give them the opportunity to make a deadline, being home on time or something like that. The keys here, though, are being very, very clear about what the consequences are of of them failing to make appropriate decisions. And because teens are going to rebel against the idea that you set a rule but didn't tell them the outcome until it was too late, right? So we want to set them up to succeed, and yet we also have to not make it seem like a threat. This can be tricky territory, and this is where it depends on your particular teenager a little bit. And so I can't tell you what the exact right thing to do is in any given particular situation, but I'm trying to sort of like start to talk about or elucidate or start to kind of get into the nitty-gritty of what it is to be in the teen years and the decisions parents are having to make as well as the decisions teens are having to make. And then we all have to do our best to kind of keep those in a relational space where it isn't about the demand for conformity or whatever, as much as it's about learning to set boundaries for ourselves and learning to, as in the teen is learning how to build and set boundaries for themselves. Like I have to be home at a certain time. I have to get my homework done. And we're turning more and more of this responsibility over to them where they can start to make some of their own appointments, regular things like if they have braces or something like orthodontic appointments or whatever, that there comes this time in this space where we can give them that task and we can allow them to fail at it. Sometimes we can allow them to miss an appointment, or we can allow them to be, to try to manage that schedule and to figure out what it takes to do that. Because teens don't love the micromanaging part anymore. They don't like to be told exactly how to do it. And in some ways, this is their opportunity to get to know themselves, to get to know their brains, how their brains work, what their strengths are, and where they need to ask for help. And some of that is rocky territory, right? It's where we try something, we fail, and then we have to figure out like, oh, do I need help or do I need to set this up differently or whatever? And there's definitely in these teen years a lot of like relatively low stakes places that they can start making those decisions. And because they are still kids, there's places where it's not appropriate to turn those decisions over to them yet. So I just think that one of the hard parts or one of the places that teens and parents struggle so often is around all of this, right? Teens are, the more they're able to take over their stuff, the more they're able to be responsible for their tasks and their appointments and their things like that, the more they feel competent. But because they're in this early place of competence, it can be sort of overblown internally. They can really start to feel like they've totally got this adulting stuff nailed and, whatever, mom and dad. And so there's just, for parents, there's a lot of, a lot of just presence, just tolerance for the things where we can see like, oh, okay, I think they know, like they think they know more than they do. And I'm going to let them figure out what the edges of that are. And then just being willing when things collapse, instead of being like, I told you so, which would be so easy to say most of the time, is also just being like, yeah, that didn't work, or that, that was hard, or that, or that must have really hurt, if it was an emotional thing or whatever. So more and more they're kind of trying to negotiate these relationships, and more teens are aware of discrepancies, right? In another one of my videos about teens, I was talking about how teens are kind of like kids sometimes, and they're adults sometimes. Like around certain things they're really kids, and around certain things they're adults, and so they flip back and forth. And I think parents flip back and forth between seeing them as kids or adults, and they really are in this weird place. And more often than not, though, they're really wanting that sort of adult feedback of, this is the place where we can kind of teach them about empathy, right? Like, oh yeah, that, I know how that feels, or I've been there too. And, or, oh, that happens to adults too, or whatever. So I think they prefer empathy and then a willingness to just like, let it be okay that they're not happy, right? We're not trying to make them be anything in particular because of this priority that their brains have on learning more about themselves, right? They're trying to figure out who they are, what's important to them. They know what's important to you. You had the first, whatever, 10, 12, maybe 14, if you were lucky, years, to tell them what's been important to you. And now it's their turn to take those and kind of like turn them over and see what they're about and see if there's anything else. Which brings me to the last piece of this video, which is parents, that we sometimes have to come to terms with the idea that our kids don't have the same values that we do. And I don't mean so much that they don't have the same opinions. I mean that different things are important to them, right? So like in my household, I went through this with my youngest, that I have a deep value for us all learning how to work together. And she has a deep value on independence and sovereignty. And neither one of those are bad. Neither one of those are wrong. But in that way of teen world, right, they directly oppose each other. And so I had to figure out that there was no way I was going to teach her, like I could teach her something about the value of us working together to like clean the house or whatever, but I was never going to make that her highest priority, because it's just not, that's not who she is. She has a different set of priorities about what's important, and she can see mine, but there was some way in me that I thought that if I could just explain to her why cleaning house was so important, that we did that together. And really it's just a chore for her. And it's something she does because she gets some kind of help out of it, right? So for her, it's a little more transactional, because she's just not interested in working together as a value system the way I am. And so it took me a long time to realize that there was nothing wrong with that she had her own value system, that hers also had some really important things inside of it that I didn't carry. And the more I was able to make room for that, the more we were able to navigate and negotiate how, like the more the nitty gritty of like, how do things get done in the house then? So it's hard sometimes to allow our children to grow into their sovereignty, because sometimes they're going to be at odds with us. They're different people than we are. And they don't just cookie cutter out of our family because they grew up here. When we truly value the sovereignty of our children, we allow them to be who they are. And and we encourage them to find out who they are. And that can be hard. I'll have a whole other video on why that's so hard. But yeah, so just noticing where in any conflict with your teen that they're really talking about their sovereignty, and checking in with yourself and seeing about where you can give them that room to explore that for themselves. And everybody's answer is going to be different, and a lot of times that alone is just a trial and error process of figuring out how that works, because it depends on the conditioning and the values and how far away they are and how what the rest of the relationship is with the teen and everything. So I know that this is difficult stuff. It's also very nuanced, which is why the teen years really invite us into a deepening relationship with ourselves and our teens around nuance, around gray areas, around places where values we have bump into each other and where we have to make decisions about what that means in those mid spaces. And so this can be a really good and connective and growth fortifying experience for both teens and parents if we let it be.